I'd like to welcome everyone today to this session of the ISCRR Learning Series. My name is Professor Sarah Anderson and I'm the Director of ISCRR. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live. For me, that's the lands of the Warrawong, the Woi-wurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge a continuing connection to land, sea, community and culture that goes back more than 100,000 years. I'd also like to extend this acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands in which you are on, and feel free to make that acknowledgement in the chat today. For those of you who are new to our webinars, ISCRR is a unique partnership between Monash University and WorkSafe Victoria. And over the past 17 years, we've had the pleasure of working with world-leading researchers in the field of workplace health and safety. Today, we're hosting the session, If You Couldn't Work Tomorrow, Navigating Income Support Systems, presented by our speaker, Associate Professor Ross Iles. Ross joined ISCRR as the Partnership and Development Manager in 2025, and he also serves as the Chief Research Advisor at SuperFriend. With a background in physiotherapy, he's passionate about improving workplace health and safety through research that informs policy and practice. Ross has authored more than 40 peer-reviewed publications and secured more than $5 million for funding in projects focused on work disability and income support systems, and so he's well versed to be talking about today's topic. A little bit of housekeeping. The session will be recorded and will be available to view on ISCRR's channels in the future. There is an opportunity to post questions using the Zoom Q&A function, which is down the bottom of your screen, as we go. So please feel free to pop questions in as they come to you, and we'll come to those at the end. We do already have some pre-submitted questions, but we'll do our best to work through them all. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ross. Thank you, Ross. And you're on mute, Ross.
Thanks very much. I am kicking goals today. I video bombed your introduction, so by pressing the button early, and then I forgot to unmute. So apologies for that. Hello, everybody. I will share my screen, and hopefully I will actually get the right screen this time. And hopefully people can see the start of the presentation. Thank you very much. This presentation is titled, What Would You Do If You Are Unable to Work? It's really focused on navigating Australia's system of income support systems. And if you haven't heard me talk before, you might pick up that I'm actually quite nasal today. I'm actually have quite a fresh cold, and this would actually be the perfect situation to utilise one of the first systems of income support, which for me would be sick leave. But today I'm presenting on this topic, which is a really, really important one in terms of how do people navigate these income support systems. Now, the research that I'll be talking about today is based on effectively two reports. Basically, it's called the Cross-Sector Project, which was first released in 2018, and that focused on the 2015-16 financial year. And earlier this year, in April, we released an update on that project. So the original project was sponsored by the Collaborative Partnership for Work Participation and sponsored by the Department of Social Services. And then what that project aimed to do was to determine the size and scope of 11 of Australia's income support systems. And then recently this year, CALI, the Council of Australian Life Insurers, commissioned an update of the same report, basically to use the same methods to identify what is the current size and scope of these income support systems. Now, these are long reports. The update itself is a 76-page report, so I'm not going to trawl through the ins and outs of every income support system. I really wanted to work out what's the best way to introduce people to the complexity that is Australia's systems of income support. And so I'll be asking a number of questions throughout the presentation for you to actually put yourself in the context of being unable to work out what is it that you would do. And I think that's really important because one thing we do know from research in this area is that when people are engaged with these systems, they aren't at their physical and mental best, and they're actually very difficult to navigate, even if you are healthy. And so we're taking the approach of actually trying to put you in the situation. So if something did happen where you were ill or injured and unable to work, you would at least be starting from a position of understanding of your own circumstances. But if we quickly talk about these reports, so in 2015-16, we identified that 6.5 million people were were accessing or active recipients of income support of some description. And that led to a cost of $37.2 billion. Now, I want to be really clear in terms of the population for the reports that we looked at. We really worked hard to identify people of working age, so that is between 18 and 65, and we know retirement age has slowly crept up, but to keep consistency between reports, the maximum was 65, and people who are previously working but have had an illness or an injury impact their ability to work. So when we talk about, for example, if we talk about Social Security, we're actually only talking about the components of Social Security where it is clear people have a reduced work capacity because of their health. And there are a number of steps that we've gone through to identify those people out of the whole gamut of people that might access Social Security, different payments for different reasons. And all of those details are outlined in these reports. So the most recent report covers the 23-24 financial year. And we identified that there were 8.5 million people accessing income support of some description, and that led to a total cost of $78.9 billion. And if you have a look at between the two reports, they're effectively 10 years apart. And what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in the amount spent in terms of income support, and then also an extra 2 million people actually accessing that income support. So there's been a bit of change in the period between those two reports. And people might remember that in between that period, we had that little thing called COVID-19 come and change how we work completely. But one of the key benefits of taking this approach is to be able to provide us with an understanding of this income support ecosystem as a whole, and it covers 11 different systems, and each of those systems have their own unique features. So as we talk through these, I'm going to launch the first of the questions, and that is, if you became ill or injured and unable to work, what would you do? Hopefully you can see on your screen there are a few responses there, and you can choose multiple responses. But if you were ill or injured, what would you do? So let's say it's tomorrow, you're unwell or you're injured, what would you do? And I can see some responses coming in. We'll share the responses with in a moment once people have had a chance to answer. Don't worry, you won't be able to be identified by the responses. They're coming in. All right, I'm going to 10 more seconds for people to respond. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and hopefully that means I can share the results. So hopefully you can see on the screen there that the majority of people would actually access their sick leave. So 2/3 of the people in the audience today basically have an idea of how much sick leave they have, and that's what they would do if they were unable to work tomorrow. Some people have no idea how much sick leave they have. Some people would tap into their annual leave. One person said, I don't know. Great. Then hopefully they get a lot out of today, at least to have a bit of a plan as to what steps you might be able to take. And it's interesting, a few people have ticked that last box, which is I have a great relationship with work, so I'm sure we'd work something out, which is often the position a lot of people have when it comes to work and if they were ill or injured. But what we do find and what happens in reality is that the longer you're unable to work, the more stressed that relationship can become, and can become very difficult for an employer to hold a role for someone if they're unable to work. So I'll stop sharing. So most people in listening today would access their sick leave. And so when we released this report earlier this year, there was a little bit of controversy in terms of how the report was reported on. So the ABC picked up the story, and their headline initially was that more than 8 million people access income support driven by a growing number of mental health claims. And this set a few tongues wagging for people in terms of that they'd never considered that sick leave was actually a source of income support. Whereas what we found in this report was that income support is accessed by almost 7.5 million Australians. So if you include 7.5 million people around income support, when people are used to seeing much smaller numbers than that, people start to pay a bit of attention. And then people also then start to go, well, hang on, what's going on? Because sick leave has never been included as income support, even though it accounts for more than half of the total paid across the income support systems, more than $43 billion each year. And in the most recent report, the average duration of sick leave was 2.8 weeks. So there was a little bit of controversy around the report because it was the first, or not the first time, for some people, the first time they'd really considered sick leave as being income support because they had a very clear idea in their mind in terms of what income support is and what it means. So I'm going to ask a question to you. Do you think sick leave is income support? Hopefully, yes, the quiz seems to be working up and running. Great. I've got at least one person sitting on the fence on the it depends, or a few people on the sitting on the fence. I like it. I put it there to see how many people would actually sit on the fence. I'll show you the results shortly. Okay, 5 more seconds for people to answer. I'll show the results. So hopefully you can see there that roughly 60% of our audience said yes, sick leave is income support. 1/3 said no, it's not. And 6 people sitting on the fence saying, well, yeah, no, it kind of depends. And this was the interesting question I was asked by reporters who were actually following up on whether the ABC was sensationalizing their reporting around the report and around income support. And I firmly believe that that sick leave is a form of income support. That in fact it is the first line of defense when it comes to supporting people when they're ill or injured and unable to work. That's not to say that when people say no, that there's an argument there in terms of, well, that's part of our minimum employment standards that when you have employees that you do need to provide them with some level of sick leave, depending on the employment circumstances. We know there are a number of workers who aren't eligible for sick leave. And so that could be a way of thinking about that it's not really income support. But the way I think about it, and it's in reference to some people that I know. So, for example, someone I know is a single mother with 3 children who works part-time, and her sick leave needs to cover any circumstance when her children are unable to attend school if they're unwell, for example. Then, if she did not have sick leave, she would not be able to. She would have to make that choice of whether she would go to work and get paid or not go to work and look after her children. And that would have a significant impact on things like being able to make her rental payments or in terms of what goes in the grocery cart in the weekly shop. So that to me is relying on income support. It's a different reliance compared to, for example, if you're on a disability support pension and you have no other means of making income, but they are still both reliant and important parts of the income support system. And when it comes to some of the controversy around the ABC reporting, the ombudsman got involved in terms of responding to people's complaints about how the report was reported on, and they actually found that there was no case to answer, particularly because the headline was changed to actually make it really clear that sick leave was part of the figures that were being referred to. So the question that I'm going to ask then, we know there are a range of people who don't have access to sick leave because of their employments. Perhaps they're casually employed, or maybe they might be self-employed. Um, what would you do if you were ill or injured and you had no sick leave? Maybe you used it all up. What would you do next? And then there are a range of options there to choose. So if you could jump into answering the poll, what would you do if you knew you had no sick leave and tomorrow you couldn't go to work because of your health? You can choose multiple options from the above. There, great. People are jumping into the quiz. That's fantastic. Getting quite a spread of answers here. This is great. I'll give people 10 more seconds to answer. Oh, maybe 5. Okay, I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. So just take a moment to have a look at the range of responses there we got from those different options. So we have a number of people would try workers' compensation, and we'll go through what's required to make a workers' compensation claim a little bit later. A number of people know they have income protection insurance, so they know that there is an opportunity for them to make sure they can still receive an income if they're unable to work. A number of people said they've got some savings, so they'll be okay for a little while. And we know from research, for example, that when people have to transition between income support systems, more than half experience a period of no income. And that period of income can be quite a long time. We'll go through that a little bit later. A number of people would apply for Centrelink. And what's actually really common, and what we found in our research too, is people believe that, yep, I'm sure I'll recover soon enough and I'll get some kind of work. And that's a really common feeling at the start of a process for people. And unfortunately, for a number of people, that their illness or injury is either progressive or it takes longer to recover than thought. So it's important to think about, well, what would you do if you had no sick leave? What are the options, and what are the different systems that are available? So let's cover off on a couple of those systems to begin with. So we have workers' compensation, which is a system which is really designed to support people to be able to recover from a work-related illness or injury and effectively return to work as soon as possible. We have systems for people who are injured on the roads or in a motor vehicle accident. And then we have another system, the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the DVA, which is really focused on people who are in the services, so the armed forces, for example. So what we did in this report, just to give you some background and give you an idea of the size of some of these systems. So in 2023-24, sick leave was accessed by 7.5 million people, and effectively $43.2 billion was spent providing sick leave to people to be able to take time off work. It's really designed for a short spell off work and then to be back at work really quite quickly. Workers' compensation, we found served 220,000 people at a cost of 6.2 billion. Now, just remember, this is income support payments only, and this is for people who missed at least one day of work. And if you go to the reports, you can find out all the methods we went to really narrow that down. In the motor vehicle accident space, there are 28,000 people and $880 million spend. And in the DVA, now I've just got a window covering the screen, it's 48,000 people at a spend of 1.3 billion. So you can actually see there's quite a different number of sizes in terms of these systems and the level of support and income support that they provide each year. But we're getting to the point where if I'm asking you what you would do if you were ill or injured and unable to work, that you actually need some details, you need some information. So for example, if you were going to identify if you were eligible for any of these three systems on the screen at the moment, you would need to know a little bit of information about the actual illness or injury. And hopefully, at the moment, people are in the situation where their health isn't actively impacting their ability to work right now. But I thought I'd provide a case study so we can provide some details around, give us some information to try and make a choice of what we would do. Now, this is quite a personal case study. It's about a 46-year-old male who should know better, but is still playing competitive soccer on the weekend and managed to sustain a complex lower limb fracture. Now, the actual injury part of this scenario is made up, but it's very realistic, I think, because it is actually my situation. This is what I choose to do on the weekends. But if I was injured and had a complex lower limb fracture, it could require multiple surgeries over the next 8 months. And I'm a physiotherapist where maybe mobility is an important aspect of my role. And because of those multiple surgeries and recoveries, there was an 8-month period where I'm unable to work in that usual job. Now, in the league that I play in, I refer to it as the old man league. There are very limited insurance processes. Yes, we pay a fee to access the league and the supports that they provide, but effectively there is not much support in terms of being able to cover costs, and certainly not in any income support, income replacement aspect. That is effectively there's no allowance in that insurance to replace income. Players play at their own risk, which is basically a result of insurers not willing to insure the players in that league because injuries are so common. So it's important to know, well, what other systems could we access? Because we may not be able to access those three we talked about earlier. So one system that we can access, and a number of people said they had income protection insurance, and that usually falls in the life insurance space. And there are two products, and I'll talk about those in a little bit later, or two systems. One's income protection, or IP, which is about a regular payment, and TPD, or total and permanent disability insurance, which is typically paid as a lump sum in recognition of the level of disability, and that disability is unlikely to change. There are circumstances where you can access your superannuation before retirement age. And then we have Social Security. And a number of people said they would apply for Centrelink when it came to what would they do if they had no sick leave. And just like before, I can give you an idea of the size and the scope of these systems. So the other systems I went through earlier. Life insurance in the 2023 report paid out to 55,000 people at a spend of $8.3 billion in income support. So if you do a quick comparison between life insurance and workers' compensation, you can pretty quickly see that there are fewer people, but a higher spend. So the rate of income replacement paid per person is much higher in life insurance in terms of the amount of income support that can be replaced. In terms of early superannuation withdrawals, we're looking at 36,000 people and $4.6 billion spend. And Social Security is by far the widest reaching income support system, covering 662,000 people and looking at a spend of $14.4 billion. And remember, we're only talking about income support for people whose health is impacting their ability to work. So these are the different sizes of the systems. So would like you to put yourself in the scenario that we were talking about. Maybe you don't play soccer, but maybe you play a different recreational sport or a different recreational activity. So on the weekend, you were doing your recreational activity, you sustained a significant injury. What would you do? What options would be available to you in this scenario? We've got a couple of different systems listed there, so please jump in and answer the question. What do you think are realistic scenarios that you might be able to access? And I'll just pause while people fill out the survey. This is great, getting some interesting results. Thanks everyone for diving into the survey. Five more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there and I'll share the results. So hopefully you can see the responses from people. So some people have selected work cover and TAC as an option that will be available. And it's highly likely that if you injured yourself in your recreational activity on the weekend, that it's unlikely that work cover or TAC would accept your claim, because for work cover, work needs to be effectively the primary cause of your injury. Unfortunately, I'm not a professional soccer player, so if you're a professional sports person, that might be an option. But recreational athletes, that doesn't apply. And for TAC, there actually needs to be an accident associated with the road use. It's probably the easiest way to summarize it, and I'm sure some experts could correct me on that aspect. A number of people have indicated that life insurance, superannuation, and social security are the options that would be available. And some people are saying, no, there's in their situation, there's no options, and that they hope there's a decent savings account to rely on. So thanks everyone for jumping into that. I'll run through my impression of the situation, given it's my scenario as it is anyway. So I would rule out workers' compensation, motor vehicle accident, and Department of Veterans Affairs because I wouldn't meet the necessary criteria to have a successful claim in those particular systems. In terms of superannuation, there are only a number of limited circumstances where you can actually claim on your superannuation fund early. And at this stage, I would say it would be too early to say whether you would actually qualify for that. I think it would be unlikely if you had a physical injury on the weekend that would be able to access your superannuation early. That basically leaves two key options, and I'll talk through these options from my perspective in the scenario. So in life insurance, there's generally two options. The income protection, which is actually about providing a regular paid income. Um, and there's the total and permanent disability option, which is really about identifying when someone has actually, their health condition has effectively plateaued or their ability to work is not going to improve. And there is a single lump sum payment that is paid in recognition that person's ability to work is unlikely to change. Now, many people, and it certainly seems like a number of people listening today are aware that they do actually have some level of insurance. Most people would carry some life insurance as part of their superannuation fund or their superannuation account. Now, what's really important is there is a need to examine your policy to make sure you understand the eligibility criteria for your cover. And I'm going to go through that in a moment. But to access your life insurance generally requires a waiting period in terms of there's a period where you have to be able to demonstrate that you're unable to work before that insurance will actually kick in and start to support your income. The other options available to people are through social services. Sorry, gone ahead. Um, the first of those options is typically job seeker. And then potentially down the line is the ability to access the disability support pension, which is typically requires demonstration that your work capacity, again, is unlikely to change. And the disability support pension pays at a slightly different rate and is recognition that people are unlikely to be able to earn income through work down the track. It's important to remember that Social Security as well, often these access to Social Security payments is means tested and does take into account your partner income. So even if, what your partner earns could actually have quite an impact on the level of income support you might be able to receive. Now, in my particular circumstances, in the scenario that I've outlaid, the key aspect you would go down is the life insurance route. And so I'm going to ask, last question is, how long is your waiting period for your insurance? And hopefully the magic will work and it will pop up. So there are a few options there. Would love you to engage with that question. Great. I'll give people 5 more seconds. Great. Thank you, everyone, for engaging with that question. And this is exactly, I'm very happy because one of the key things I wanted people to get out of this learning series is to be able to identify or learn a little bit about their own circumstances. So I've got one person who responded that they don't know if they have life insurance. So I would encourage that person to actually find out, investigate their super fund to find out if they are actually do have some level of life insurance there. A number of people know they have life insurance but have no idea what the waiting period would be. So that means if you were ill and injured and unable to work, at the moment you wouldn't actually know how long you would need to wait before you would actually be able to replace your income through that insurance that you've been paying for regularly, whether that's through your superannuation fund contributions or whether it's through your own retail policy. And that's actually really important because when you're ill and injured, we really want your focus to be on being able to focus on your recovery and get well. And we know it's a challenge for people to navigate and understand what's going on with insurances when they're unwell. I've got the last option there. A number of people said, wait, life insurance, I'm not dead. Uh, I put that there so people go, well, why are we talking life insurance? I'm only, I might only be injured. We're only talking about a broken leg. And that's where sometimes the labels that we have in this space can be a little bit tricky. But in life insurance is the umbrella term for things like income protection and TPD insurance. So I'm going to keep going through a case study to help, I guess, try and contextualize a little bit about why some of these things why these asking these questions is important for you to know. And I'm going to use my own personal circumstances to tell you a little bit about why it's important and what are some of the challenges that happen. So I, a number of years ago, I examined what income support or what life insurance details were in my life insurance policy that was within my super. And I actually looked at that, and the definition in terms of being able to work was actually what's referred to as an own occupation definition. An any occupation definition. So that meant the insurance would only pay if I was unable to work any occupation for a certain period of time after I was injured. Now, I work as a physiotherapist as an academic, and that requires me to be able to concentrate for long periods. And I wanted to make sure that my insurance or my ability to work was actually going to be judged against the kind of work that I was doing that required that level of concentration. So I took out a retail life insurance policy. So I actually looked at different options and made sure that there was an own occupation definition. So that would be the judge that against which my ability to work would be measured. Could I actually perform my original work? My main concern being, if something happened that meant I couldn't concentrate for long periods, that would have a real impact on the type of work that I could do. So in doing that, there was an underwriting process that had some hiccups. So when you take out an insurance policy, they ask you all about your health history, basically, both physical and psychological. And so I disclosed that I'd actually accessed the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program through Monash University when I was going through a particular period of high stress. And the result of that was that they wanted to remove any mental health conditions from my policy. Now, because I have a high level of health literacy, I'm a physiotherapist, and I have a level of understanding of the insurance sector, I asked to speak to a senior underwriter to actually be able to have that exclusion taken out because I actually accessed support, and that support was effective, and I needed no further support after that. So there took a level of knowledge to actually make sure the insurance suited my needs. But I made some work changes where I'd been working in the same organization for many years, and I had built up, I think it was about 3 or 4 months worth of sick leave. And what that meant was when I had a long waiting period in my default insurance, I could leave it there because I knew between sick leave and my annual leave, I think it was about 6 months in total, that I would be able to, I would have an income coming in before the income support through my insurance policy would kick in. But I changed jobs and sacrificed all of that sick leave and realized that, well, to make sure I protected my family if I was unable to make an income, if I needed to make rent payments, mortgage payments, etc., that I might need to reduce the waiting period. So there was another underwriting process, even though it was the same level of cover, and I wanted to reduce the waiting period. It took about 12 months to actually go through the underwriting process. Again, there were a number of investigations. There were 3 different investigations because there was some spirit and some coincidental findings on some scans that needed to be followed up. But it took 12 months to change the level of cover when I was healthy and have a high level of knowledge of these systems, that there is a significant level of admin that needs to be covered. And one of the real challenges that people face in this system, in our ecosystem of income supports, is they need to work through these administrative processes when they are unwell, and that can be a real challenge. And not only are they unwell, they might not have a high level of health literacy or have an understanding of the different systems that are at play. So it can be a real challenge for people. And when we talk about 11 different income support systems, one of the things that we've tried to do is try and summarize that easily for people. And we've tried that a few different ways. So in the very first cross-sector report, this is one of my favorite summaries. It's what I refer to as the solar system, where each of the different income support systems are the different circles. They look like they're planets. And in this report, we looked to make sure we showed that there were pathways for people to follow, and it looked like it's straightforward. You would go from sick leave all the way through to workers' compensation or just sick leave or whatever it might be. But we since found that even what eligibility criteria would describe as being a fairly simple pathway or a simple transition, that when we spoke to people who have experienced it, they actually find it really quite challenging, and that even interacting with one income support system can actually be really quite difficult. So we tried to summarize that a different way and look at things more like a transport map. And there's lots of twists and turns and paths that overlap and opportunities to change from one system to another. But what we know is these system transitions, or when you do change, they're often forced and they are actually periods of high stress. And when people actually need to get used to a whole new set of system rules. And so it can be really quite challenging for people. And what is really clear is that it's very difficult to simplify how these systems work, how they operate, particularly from the experience of someone who is actually trying to navigate those systems. And with some of the work we did with the collaborative partnership, we actually developed a system dynamic model. I'm not going to explain the model, but you can see that there's lots of different connections between the different components. So it really is quite complex. And this is one of the key things about these different systems is while they're not very well connected, and what I mean by not very well connected is there's not a great information flow from one system to another in terms of from a workers' compensation claim to life insurance, for example. There's often needs to be a new process when you enter a new system to provide the information that's needed to judge whether a claim can be made, can be accepted or not. So they're not very connected in terms of data flow. But when you make changes in one system, you do actually impact the other systems. And so what we do know from some research in this area is that, for example, in workers' compensation in New South Wales, they made a change to the length of time that people could actually access their workers' compensation benefits. So it used to be open-ended, but then there was introduced a 5-year time limit. And it was found that significantly more people who were affected by the change in legislation ended up accessing social security benefits than you saw in other long-term workers' compensation. So when you change workers' compensation, in this case, it led to more people accessing social security. And there has been some modelling done by Monash and the University of Melbourne groups that to say that, well, if the changes that were introduced in Victoria around psychological claims, so tightening how many people can access claims for a psychological injury at work, that it will actually project that we'll see an increase in life insurance income protection claims as a result of those changes, particularly if those changes are actually adopted in other jurisdictions as well. So while the systems aren't that connected, they do affect each other. So if you change one aspect of the system, people will still require income support and they will find it in some other part of the system. And what that really speaks to is about sustainability. What we do know, and I mentioned this briefly before, is that when people do move between income support systems, approximately 50% will experience, it's actually a little bit more than 50%, actually report having no income. And in that period, that uh, duration of income support, of not having any income, can be from 7 to 13 months, which is a long time to actually experience, have no income coming in. And I know that would have a big impact in my circumstance if my income if I earned zero for a year, that would have a big impact on our lifestyles. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time. It is time to wind up and get ready to answer some questions. So we do know Australians Australia has a complex system of income supports. Now, the different systems, they have different purposes and they each have their own set of rules. And so from the perspective of someone accessing those systems, it's important first off that they know what systems are available so they can identify what are the rules and are they eligible. And while the systems aren't very connected in terms of data and flow through and making it easy for people to identify what are the needs that they need to demonstrate to make a claim, how they operate does impact other systems. If you change who can access one system, it will impact the other systems in the ecosystem. And it's really important to remember that people have to navigate these systems when they are not at their best. And there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that people find it extremely difficult to engage with these systems. In fact, if readers of The Age in Melbourne this weekend, there was a story about someone having challenges accessing TAC. And so we often hear these stories about where things don't go well. But we do need to remember that these systems do operate well for a large number of people. And easiest example to give is workers' compensation, for example, that we know that the return to work rates for people accessing workers' compensation sit at around 90%. So while there are plenty of examples of the difficulties in the system, we do need to remember they do serve people quite well, and a large number of people quite well. But that doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement. I'm going to pause and take a sip of water.
And I am going to jump in, Ross,
Thanks, Sarah.
and just let people know there've been a couple of questions into the Q&A, which I think we've answered. But if you've got others, but we'll get started on a few of these pre-submitted questions. So the first one is, how should we broach the question of reforming our income support system to fix some of the gaps and overlaps you talked about? What might be the best place to start?
This is an interesting question to answer because I'm tempted to say, well, we should blow it all up and start again, um, because we do have what feels like a bit of a piecemeal approach. But I think the place to start is probably as far upstream as we possibly can. And the system that the majority of people access and has the highest rate of spend is in sick leave. Yet we don't actually have a good system of data collection within sick leave to identify, well, are there certain early indicators that we might be able to flag so we can say, well, this particular person, they're going to need some help early, and how can we actually provide that help to them so they don't need to access the other parts of the income support system? Um, that's where I would start, is actually about looking at how can we actually collect the data in the as far upstream as we can, and then look at how can we connect the different data silos, because they are quite siloed, and it's quite an effort to actually connect the data from the different systems to then identify, well, what are the opportunities for us to actually intervene and actually make the experience of people being unable to work, and providing them with income support so they can focus on recovery. How can we facilitate that for as many people as possible?
So I'm going to add a question in here just because I can. So do you think it's a data linkage in understanding between systems problem, or is it a systems organization problem, or both?
Okay, two things. First up, some of the spend in terms of what we're saying in terms of income support is absolutely necessary. And it's actually really beneficial to make sure that people can actually can have the support they need to get better. Unfortunately, illnesses happen, accidents do happen. We know we have lots of controls to make that you know reduce the likelihood. So in terms of the spend in this space, some of it is absolutely necessary, but some of it is not. And that's the problem part, I think, that we're talking about. I think by connecting the data sources together, it will actually help us to more likely identify those cases where some of that spend is unnecessary, or as in we could do better for that person in terms of being able to get them back to a better outcome sooner.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you look at the different systems in terms of an organizational point of view, they all serve different purposes, and those purposes, they make sense. So, for example, workers' compensation is focused on if you're injured at work or as a result of work. So that makes sense. If you're injured on the roads, it makes sense that you have a system because there's differences and there's certain characteristics that are more that you see more often. For example, in a car accident, so you could actually identify. You might be able to develop expertise and systems that really support people really well in those particular circumstances. Social Security has to deal with a wide gamut of circumstances because it is actually spreading across hundreds of thousands of people. So there are the systems have different purposes, and so it makes sense the purpose of each system and how they go about. When you look at how they provide their income support, it matches their purpose really well. What we can improve is how those systems actually connect and speak to each other. How can we pass information through? So if you're injured and ill, first of all, it's really clear where can you get support from. It's not the burden isn't placed on that injured person to actually identify, well, what can I do? And even in our audience that I assume are not in that, I'm assuming are healthy, that there is still some, there's not a lot of, there are some people who are unsure as to what they would do. Throw on top of that, trying to recover, it becomes a real challenge.
Yep. This probably ties into that point a little bit, which is the next question on, is there a difference to how the system treats younger people of working age compared to older people of working age?
There is, and there are two things that I would point towards here in terms of younger people when they first start out work. Typically, it used to be that everybody got life insurance within their superannuation fund, um, and it used to be you had to opt out of that insurance. Now, when you're a younger person starting work, it is now an opt-in to that life insurance. And so young people have a bit of a different, there is a slight difference there because they might not be aware of the implications. And when you're young, you think, yes, I'm going to be healthy forever. Um, and so there is a difference in terms of how young people are treated in terms of that insurance aspect. There's another aspect in terms of the impact on younger people, for example, when it comes to TPD or total and permanent disability insurance. That as a younger person, if something has happened and as a result you might be labeled as totally and permanently disabled because you've gone through a particular process. Maybe it's through the DVA and you've been discharged from the armed forces and uh, you've received a total and permanent disability payment. There is a label that goes with that, and that label can be really challenging, and that can be probably have a longer term impact for younger people than it will for people who actually have had a longer working life. So there are some differences, and we do know that we are seeing more mental health conditions with younger people. So we're seeing some systems actively constrict the ability to claim for mental health conditions. So there are going to be some challenges that are going to be different for younger workers than there are for older workers.
There's another question here, which was to the questioner's knowledge and mine as well. There's currently no pathway connecting employment, termination, workers' compensation, rejection, sick leave depletion, and TPD. Given that super holds nearly $4 trillion worth of funds, is there an opportunity for further efforts to be aimed at sort of enabling injured workers to access different sorts of entitlements?
Absolutely, there's potential for that, and we're actually I, a few years ago, I actually did a review to identify what are workers' compensation systems in particular doing to prepare people for exiting from workers' compensation schemes. And I'm aware now that there are more services available than there used to be in terms of connecting people who are known that they're going to have a transition from, for example, workers' compensation, to actually connect them with services, connect them, whether that be through social workers or whether it would actually be through job coaches, for example, that can actually take them through developing a resume to identify what jobs would be suitable for them. Perhaps it's in a different area. So we're getting better, but it doesn't. My impression is that it's actually a within scheme, a within system process, not an across system process. And there are definitely benefits to working out or having a connected system because each system would benefit from helping people to identify, well, if their illness has impacted their ability to work, what are the different options and how can they be supported to identify new options or different options? Um, One of the challenges, though, is that we don't necessarily have bodies set up to identify that collaboration to work out, even though there would be common benefits. Who pays for it? Where does it live? And how do we tell people about it? Are some of the key questions that need to be answered. There are resources there, but they're currently resources that haven't been used for that purpose before. Um, I really like that idea of actually being able to access or using some of that uh, some of that collateral, if you like, because it would benefit every person whose health impacts their ability to work if there was a well-known system of support that they could rely on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we don't have harmonisation across even our workers' compensation schemes across the jurisdictions. And then you add the transport schemes that don't have harmonisation. But superannuation is a harmonised across Australia scheme. So there is some level of federated model to the schemes that exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's probably worth mentioning here too, Sarah, that all the data that we're talking about in this report that has sort of formed the basis of what I've been talking about today, they're the people whose illness has impacted their ability to work that we know of, that they've made a claim of some description, whether it's through workers' compensation or they've accessed sick leave. There are many more people that we know that aren't represented in this data, that they've become ill or they're injured and they still work despite their illness or injury, or they stop working, or they go and find work somewhere else that we don't actually know about that could really benefit from some of the supports that we're talking about. And they're not represented in this situation here.
Yeah. I'm missing from lots of the data.
Mhm.
Probably one last question before we need to finish up, which was, and I've there's a lump of questions together, which are really around, people had questions around individuals' sort of specific circumstances and accessing income support. And the questions broadly were around accessing either disability support pension or accessing super funds and other things for either specific conditions that aren't listed or for fluctuating disability that changes. And I think especially when we're moving, when we're having people with more and more mental health injuries, that fluctuation comes into it even more.
Absolutely. I think our current systems are actually they are generally set around more physical complaints because physical complaints tend to have generally a more stable trajectory or predictable trajectory. Um, One of the real challenges for these systems is for people who do experience periods of I guess, high levels of, and I'll just refer to high levels of work disability. So high periods of ill health where they're really unable to work. But then that might follow a period where they can get back to work, and they do so, and it's good to get back to work for a variety of reasons. But our systems don't tend to cope very well with being able to work and not being able to work, being able to work, not being able to work. If you've got a great employer who understands things that are going on, they might be able to make some adjustments. But it can be a real challenge in terms of having to make repeated claims, whether it's through workers' compensation or through life insurance, to get through those periods. I think depending on the nature of the condition, some conditions are relatively well understood, but we know there are a range of conditions that are quite rare, and that's where it's actually really important to be familiar, I guess, with your own circumstances. So your own life insurance policy, for example, does it only cover a specific set of conditions, or does it kick in when you are unable to work, regardless of the cause? So it doesn't matter if you've got a super rare condition. It's actually about your ability to work. And that's what I was hoping to get at today, is that people can be familiar with their own circumstances, because we know from the research that when we look at the eligibility rules for the systems, it seems logical and ordered and makes sense. But when we do the research from the perspective of the people, it's all about those circumstances. It's all about the specific condition that person has. It's all about what's the impact for their job in terms of they might have had a car accident that has led to a broken leg, but that really severely impacts their ability to work as a teacher, for example. They're just really uncomfortable. So it might actually have an impact that is really quite specific and can be hard to fit into the rules of particular systems. And so it is all about the details. And the more that you know about the rough idea that you've got in terms of, I know it's going to take this long, or I know I'm covered for these conditions, then you've got some level of knowledge when the worst happens.
All right, I'm going to ask one, but you've only got 30 seconds to answer it.
Oh, okay.
But we've looked at the real individual level, and we did look at that system. And there's just one question about the fact that there's been efforts to improve the interface between the systems. How do you think that's going in 30 seconds?
In 30 seconds, I think like everything, there's a lot of learning that's happening. I think one of the what we need to do, I think there's a risk that we throw new tools at things before we actually sit and consider what are the real connections and understand what is the best way to serve the people who are experiencing the system, not necessarily just the data connected to the systems. Yes, we might be able to connect the data, but does it benefit the people who are going through the system, who require the support? And does it enable them to focus on what they need to focus on to recover better? Because when they recover and are able to return to work, that's the best outcome for everyone. Was that 30 seconds?
That was, I'm going to call it close enough.
Okay.
So to finish off, just a reminder that the webinar will be made available to all registrants in the coming week through your email address you provided. There will be an evaluation survey that pops up at the end. Please share your thoughts. It won't take very long, but we'd really appreciate you filling it in. And we will continue to run webinars like this on a range of different topics throughout the year. So if there is a topic that interests you that you would like to see us cover, please contact us. Our email address is info@iscrr.com.au. And thank you, Ross, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.